You guys are tuned in to S&M Radio. I'm Shanon.
I'm Mark.
And this time around, we are talking about an Alfred Hitchcock classic, 1960 movie, Psycho.
Yeah, that's my favorite Alfred Hitchcock movie for sure.
I don't know why I had 63 stuck in my head. I almost said 63 two times, and I was like, 1963? No, it's not 3.
Yeah, I could tell you wanted to add an extra number on.
I know. I was like, oh. But I think the reason why I wanted to do that was to go back to, I don't think it was quite a year ago. We did an episode of S&M Radio where we covered The Birds. I think it was like last August or September with Blake and Molly when they were special guests. And that movie came out in 63. So I think that's why I had 63 stuck in my head for some reason.
Yeah, Psycho. What a great flick. You know, have you read the book too?
I have read the book, yep.
I thought the book the book is virtually identical to the movie. I mean, the only real difference that I recall is that they made Norman Bates kind of like he wasn't like, he was overweight, kind of like an alcoholic guy. I remember that. And then the death of Marion Crane was different, where he severs her head in the shower as opposed to the stabbing that we get in the movie.
That probably was because in 1960, if they would have had a decapitation in the shower, then the movie probably would have never gotten released.
Yeah, it wouldn't have worked. But I was actually surprised how closely, other than those two things, even the dialogue played out very similar to the what they ended up filming.
And I remember that too, because I don't remember the first time that I saw Psycho, but I do remember probably 10 or 15 years ago, for some reason, I don't remember exactly why, but I had it in my head that, you know what, I'm going to read that book. And it's a real short book, too. I think it's only like 200 pages or 250 pages or something.
Yeah, it is short. That was surprising, too.
And went to the library, they had it, and picked it up and brought it home, read the book, and I've said this on this show several times in the past that I like reading the source material for things that are based off of movies or comics or whatever. Usually I like doing that before I watch the movies or whatever. But there's times where that doesn't always work out. And this was one of those times where I read the book and then I was like, oh, cool, and now I'm going to watch the movie. And I think I might have even rented the movie from the library too and threw it on, and like the same thing, because I had just finished reading it and I was like, damn, that's like almost word for word from the book. That's kind of cool.
Well, I think it was that movie Hitchcock that came out, and because they talk about the book in that, and I think that got me interested to look up the book, and then so I got it from the library and all that. So I read that, and then I also read The Exorcist right around the same, I think it was one summer, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And The Exorcist was actually surprisingly just like the movie as well, which kind of surprised me. The movie was virtually, the screenplay that they used for the movie was virtually the same as the book. The book was great, and the movie is excellent. Psycho to me, actually, I remember, I think the first time when I saw it when I was really young, my mom was a huge Alfred Hitchcock fan. And I remember her, when I was really young, telling me about Psycho. And as a young kid, it was like, whoa, that is so okay. You know, my mom's telling me I must have been like really, like first grade. And she's telling me about this guy who has like multiple personality disorder and how he splits his mind and he can he's his mom and he kills people. And I was like, what? You know, I'm like this little kid, like that's like the creepiest thing I've ever heard in my life. And I thought it was crazy good back then, and I was just a little kid, and I still to this day think it's a great movie.
I do remember watching it a lot when I was in my 20s.
Oh, yeah?
And I think primarily the reason for it at that time was the fact that, you know, when I was in high school and after high school and stuff, I was always kind of known as the guy who likes horror movies. And
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember watching it a lot when I was in high school, but I think it was one of those things once I think it was like probably around the same time I got the first DVD player and I had Psycho on DVD. And, I think it was one of those things where like, well, I have to get that one because, that's the foundation for modern horror.
Yeah, I actually associate you with Psycho 3 for some reason. Kind of like I associate you with the Creepshow movies.
Yeah, I do remember watching Psycho 3 a lot when I was in grade school and stuff. I remember when that first came out and it was like on HBO and stuff.
Yeah, you had it taped or something. And I think I watched
did. Or that, or might have had it on VHS even.
Okay.
But
yeah, because I remember you having that, and that was like kind of like you were showing, like kind of like how Mary Lou was sort of like the movie I found, and I was like showing it to you all the time. I think Psycho 3 was like your movie that you had recorded, and like you were showing it to me because I remember watching it at your house.
Yeah, and I don't know if I ever saw the original Psycho before or even shortly after Psycho 3, but I do remember Psycho 3, and like I said, up until I would say probably my mid-20s, if you said Psycho, I would always just immediately think of Psycho 3.
Okay. I remember Psycho 2, because when we finally got cable, well, I guess it was pretty new at the time, like in the early 80s, I remember getting cable, and like Psycho 2 was like the big movie, like for HBO and all those movie channels, and like everybody was like, because they just put it on cable, and so Psycho 2 was like in constant rotation, and so it was like that summer that we got cable, it was like I remember just always, oh, Psycho 2, Psycho 2, Psycho 2. So that was kind of like the big sequel for me, and I remember as a little kid watching that must have been like, gosh, like again, like 83, 84, something like that when that was out. So I think I might have saw Psycho 2 first before I saw the original. But then when I finally did see the original, I got to admit, that was just, it blew me away. And to this day, it's in my top 5 favorite horror movies of all time. And I wish I could put it in the number 1 spot, but and I probably, as looking at it as in terms of just the film itself, I probably should, just because it's so well done. But I just can't. It just doesn't, like Carpenter's Halloween. And just that's just my horror movie, so I can't like put anything above that. But yeah, Psycho was excellent horror movie, and like you said, it was sort of like the one that kind of started it all. It really did, and I mean, it really. I don't think there would be a Halloween if there wasn't a Psycho.
No, not at all. I don't think there would have been a Texas Chainsaw Massacre if there wouldn't have been a Psycho.
Right.
And then, without Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I don't think there would have been the Halloween.
Yeah, I think like when I think like Carpenter, what he used in Halloween, like, I mean, there's a lot of similarities to Psycho. Like one of the big things is the butcher knife. Like he uses that, like Michael Myers only uses a butcher knife in the original Halloween, and it's the exact same knife that Norman Bates uses in Psycho.
Whoa! Spoiler!
Oh no! I gave it away. Yeah, if you didn't know that Norman Bates uses a butcher knife in Psycho, you probably shouldn't be listening to this. But he also uses the like those shots where where Tommy Doyle looks out his window and he sees Michael Myers standing by his house, like his silhouette. That's like the exact same shot of Norman Bates standing by his house, up on the hill. It's like the same. I mean, Carpenter was clearly heavily influenced by Norman or by Hitchcock's Psycho. I mean, Psycho is just an incredible movie. I mean, from start to finish, that movie just, and I mean, even the ending. I don't want to jump too far, but like that whole final dialogue at the end, or the monologue of the psychiatrist talking about explaining everything of what happened. Every time I watch that scene, I get chills. It's like, oh, wow, that's so cool.
You had mentioned earlier about the book that we both read and how you had watched that movie Hitchcock a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I saw the same movie, and to go back to the book, one of the things that they talked about in that movie was when they first started pitching this idea of making a movie off of the book. One of the things that they did after they got the rights to make the movie was they went out and bought up all of the copies of Psycho that they could find to keep people from reading it, so they would be in awe when they saw the movie. And I wasn't sure if that actually happened or not. I was like, really? That doesn't seem like that would happen nowadays. And I did some digging, and everywhere I can find it looks like that did happen. I'm not sure if that's actually an urban myth or not, but supposedly when Alfred Hitchcock acquired the rights to the movie, which he supposedly got for like less than $10,000, they went out and bought all the copies of Psycho that they could get, and then, went to make the movie. And then one of the other cool things about this movie that I didn't realize until I think it was after seeing that movie or doing some research for this episode was the fact that Psycho is in black and white, and it was 1960, so it wasn't like it was in the period of black and white films necessarily, but they actually shot it in black and white to save money because the studio didn't want to give them his usual budget for the movies, so that's why they shot it in black and white. And he uses actually the television crew from his television series. So I don't know if he actually had to pay them any extra for the movie or not, or they're like, okay, well, this is just going to be like a normal shoot, so you guys go to work.
He did a great job, that's for sure.
There's one little complaint that I have about the movie that we'll get to. Isn't the very end. It's sort of close to the very end. But this movie holds up very well. It's, still a little bit creepy where it needs to be creepy. There are a few things with it that are a little bit lacking, but again, that was how they did stuff in 1960. One of the things that's a little bit comical is when Marion Crane is driving around and you have like the screen going, behind her. You can totally tell it's fake, that kind of stuff. But again, you watch any of the movies from that time, that's how they all were. Being in black and white too, I think also adds just that bit of eeriness to it that probably wasn't done intentionally because they were just trying to save money. But then after it came out, you're like, ugh. Like it just adds that little bit of just creepiness to it. Yeah,
it's very eerie. I think this movie holds up very, very well. The shower scene is still disturbing. I remember as a kid, the two horror scenes that really stuck with me, really kind of just shook me up, was the shower scene of Psycho and the killing of Judith Myers in the original Halloween. Those two, and they're very similar. It's like a stabbing. And I think Psycho's shower scene to this day holds up, and it's shot so well. I think the mystery behind the film and how you don't really know what's going on, especially if you've never seen the film before or you haven't heard about it or know what and there's, believe it or not, there are a few people that haven't seen it or didn't know that what the whole idea of who Norman Bates was and everything. And just the whole psychological element to this film is just really, really awesome. Where do you put this in your your favorite horror movies? Is this up there for you?
Oh yeah, I would say it's definitely in the top 5 for sure. So we haven't given anything as far as like a plot line or anything to this. I mean, like we said before, if you don't know this story, you probably should go watch it. But the plot for Psycho is really simple, which, I mean, for most horror movies, they really are. It starts off with, you have this secretary, Marion Crane, who steals $40,000 from one of her employer's clients, and she goes on the run. She ends up checking into this remote motel, who is ran by Norman Bates, who we are led to believe is having some mommy issues, if you will. And then,
quite a few.
Basically, Marion is killed in the shower, and then her employer and her her sister and her sister's boyfriend or fiance or whatever he was at the time are on the look for her, and then ends up this private detective ends up at the motel doing some questioning, and then the sister ends up at the motel doing some questioning of Norman, and then we come to find out that Norman's mom is actually a mummy. And Norman's running around in drag, cutting up people.
Yeah, and the greatest, it's so cool how it's like explained at the very end of the movie. They have a psychiatrist who gives you basically explains why Norman Bates is dressing up like his mother and why his mother's corpse is in the basement. And basically Norman Bates as a kid, he and his mom lived together. I guess his dad was out of the picture, and they had this really close relationship. And then all of a sudden his mom met this new guy, and Norman became crazy with jealousy, and ended up killing his mom. Like, he poisoned her and poisoned the man that she had fallen in love with. And he couldn't live with himself for doing that. So he dug up her corpse and basically kind of tried to revive her psychologically in his own mind, like, oh, she's still alive. And then eventually he gives like half of his personality over to her. And so he had this like split personality. And but it turns out that the mother personality is the dominant personality and the very aggressive personality. So every time he is attracted to a woman or something, the mother personality comes out in him, and he has a rage, and he attacks and he kills. And the way they describe it, that you don't see it in the movie, but there were several other missing women who Norman had taken care of in the mother person while being the mother. So, gosh, that motel who would want to go there?
So, I know you didn't watch this, but I watch the Bates Motel TV series, which is a prequel.
I watched a few of the episodes of the first season.
Yeah, so it's a modern day prequel, even though this was set this would have been set like in the 50s. It was released in 60. But the Bates Motel is a modern day prequel, and it just wrapped up its 4th season, which in my mind should have been the last season. It does touch on a lot of that stuff that we hear at the end of the movie. There are a few inconsistencies, probably the biggest being that the prequel is based in a different town than the actual movie was supposed to be in. In the series, it happens in White Pine Bay, which is in Oregon, I think, in the series. And then in the movie, it was in Fairvale, I think is where it was at. Was one of the other things. But then there was like some of the other stuff, like they had said at the end of the movie how the father had died when Norman was 5. I think the father got killed off when he was like 13 or 15, or maybe even older than that. But the TV show did a really good job of having this relationship between the mother character who was Norma and then Norman. There was a lot of like soap opera kind of crap in it, and there was a lot of extra stuff that I didn't really think that needed to be in it. Spoiler alert, if you haven't watched Bates Motel and you plan on watching it, you probably should go watch it. Even though it's like watching Titanic, you know what's going to happen. Norma dies in season 4. She's not poisoned with cyanide. Actually, it's Norman tries to do this suicide murder thing where they have a faulty heater in the house, and he shuts all of the vents to all the other rooms except for the one bedroom, and he crawls in bed with his mother and turns the furnace on and tries to basically suffocate them while they're sleeping.
So he's trying to kill himself?
Yeah, yep.
Oh, okay.
And it's the same thing that they say in the movie. She's in a relationship with this guy that he doesn't like, and the guy finds them unconscious in the room, drags them both out. He's trying to revive Norma, and Norman wakes up on his own, and that episode ends, and then we come to the next episode, and we find out that Norma is in fact dead.
Wow. Okay.
That was the final episode of the show and of the season, and Norman digs her up and brings her back to the house. And one of the things in the show that they didn't get to in this version of Psycho, really, they kind of touched on it a little bit. It comes out in some of the sequels, but throughout the series, Norman does practice taxidermy. So I'm assuming that he stuffs his mom at some point. I would assume we'll probably see that in the next season. But this is my idea for how the Bates Motel TV series should have ended instead of going to another whole season like they're planning on doing. They're planning on doing a whole season 5, and there's already talks that Marion Crane is going to be in it and all this other stuff, so they're probably going to end up wrecking it.
Interesting.
But they should have had maybe one more episode, or had the final episode be 2 hours long, and, you know, Norman digs Norma up. They go back to the house. They kind of wrap stuff up with some of the characters that were in the show that weren't ever in the movies. And they could have done a flash forward, maybe 5 years or 10 years or whatever, and kind of had the one character and shown what is going on with him and his maybe now wife and maybe kids, and then maybe the cop that was, the gentleman that was involved with Norma, kind of showing him off and doing something showing them as they moved on. And then they could have shown this blonde lady, stealing $40 or $40,000, not $40, $40,000. I think they would probably have upped it for this. They probably would have had to make $400,000 or whatever, or $4 million. But had her taken off from wherever she was supposed to be at, cut to the very end of the movie, and have Marion Crane's car pull into the parking lot of the Bates Motel, and have Norman looking over his mother's shoulder in the rocking chair out the window of her bedroom, and then have Marion ring the bell or whatever she does, and then have Norman go, "Oh, I'll be right down," and that should have been the end of it.
That would have been kind of cool.
But no, they're going to do a whole nother season. They're going to end up wrecking it. Yeah, my only complaint about
you were going to say that
the Psycho movie is when you might, if you haven't seen it for a while, you might not remember this. Anthony Perkins in Psycho, he portrays the Norman Bates character perfectly.
Yes,
in my opinion.
Oh yeah, he's great.
He should have won an Oscar for it. The only problem that I have with that portrayal of Psycho, and we've already kind of given this away, so it's not going to be a shock. At the very end of the movie, you have Marion's sister goes down into the fruit cellar of the house and sees this old woman sitting in a chair, taps her on the shoulder, "Mrs. Bates," and she spins around and it's this mummified body, and she's like, "Ah!" And then all of a sudden, come running in the doorway is Norman in a dress and a wig and the big butcher knife and stuff, and then he is restrained by a police officer right away. And then you have this weird, he his facial expressions all as he's getting fought to the ground, and up until that moment you're like he does a really good job up until that moment, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, what?
Oh yeah, I know what scene you're talking about.
Yeah, it just kind of takes it down just a notch a little bit. You just kind of lose it a little bit right in that moment. You're like, oh.
You do have to admit that I understand what you're saying about it, because it is sort of an awkward type of scene, because he's mentally he thinks he's his mom at that point, so he's kind of wearing a wig and he's wearing her dress. To see that and kind of the facial expression he makes at that point when he's being brought down to the ground does make things kind of awkward. But the one thing about that is that the scene right when he walks through the door and he comes in there, to me that is really, really creepy.
You're right.
It's just the way he looks, that look on his face, oh wow, that is what what is going on?
And then you cut from that to that end of the movie, the final scene that you had talked about before, where he's sitting on that bed and you have that psychiatrist like talking in the background, and he is just making all these facial expressions where he's kind of it's like he's listening to what's being said about him, but he's not, but he's like smirking in the right time, right in the right spots. And then that very last cutaway shot where he like looks down at the floor and then he kind of looks up into the camera.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, the guy's creepy.
And if you look really closely too, they superimpose the skull face of his mother, like the mother we saw in the fruit cellar, over his face. So you kind of see it like a few shots you'll see like that if you look real closely. I mean, we talk about a lot of movies on here, and there's all these different categories and there's all these different levels. I mean, there's like the cheesy horror movies that are fun to watch, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, kind of a terrible movie, but still kind of fun to watch, but then there's movies like Psycho, and that's so high up on the list. That's high on the food chain. This is classic cinema. This is a skill level and a talent level of the filmmakers involved that, it lightning in a bottle doesn't always happen. Hard, to get the formula right, to get it this right, it's one of those films that you just gotta appreciate for what it is.
It's funny too with this movie and other movies, when you look back at them and you're doing some research, getting ready for something like this, and you see all these stories about how the rights to make this into a movie were denied a couple of times by different studios. When the movie first came out, it had some mixed reviews and people didn't like it and all this other stuff. And then all of a sudden it starts getting some momentum going behind it. And now you are 56 years later, and it's not only considered one of Alfred Hitchcock's best movies, but it's considered one of the best movies of all time.
Oh, yeah.
And not just by, like, jackasses like me and you, who, have no, we have no cred being film critics, even though technically we are film critics now.
Right.
But, I mean, even by scholars and real international film critics and stuff, everybody considers Psycho a piece of cinematic history.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's high up on the food chain. So, yeah, we give it 2 thumbs up. Excellent film. Go watch Psycho if you haven't seen it.